Who was Joab, the most revered commander of Israel's army, whose fierce loyalty and ruthless tactics earned him both respect and fear? In a kingdom where power was as volatile as the shifting sands of time, King David found himself in a precarious dance with the very man he depended on most. Why did the anointed king, a man described as a man after God's own heart, harbor a deep-seated fear of this formidable warrior? In today's video, we embark on a gripping journey through the rise and fall of Joab, a man whose sword carved out victories, yet whose ambitions cast long shadows over the throne. But before we dive into the intrigues of power, betrayal, and bloodshed, let's begin at the very beginning, the birth of Joab and the legacy that shaped him into one of the most enigmatic figures of biblical history. Join us as we unravel the complexities of a man who stood at the crossroads of loyalty and treachery, revealing why he became both a trusted ally and a source of dread for the king of Israel. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was one of the most influential military leaders in the history of ancient Israel and played a central role in the reign of King David. Zeruiah, Joab's mother, was David's sister, which made Joab David's nephew. Zeruiah had two other sons, Abishai and Asahel, making Joab the eldest of the trio. Growing up in the household of Zeruiah, Joab and his brothers were likely instilled with a strong sense of loyalty and duty towards their family, especially toward their uncle David, who would eventually become king. Joab's birth and upbringing in this environment laid the groundwork for his fierce loyalty to David, as well as his willingness to take ruthless actions to protect and advance David's reign. This close family connection contributed to Joab's lasting loyalty to David, but also led to numerous conflicts and tensions, as Joab was fiercely independent and often acted without David's approval. The complex relationship between Joab and David spanned decades and was marked by loyalty, conflict, and ambition, as Joab's military expertise helped David secure the throne and expand Israel's territories, yet his ruthless actions often put him at odds with David's sense of justice and mercy. Joab's life was one of both service and defiance, illustrating the dynamic nature of power, loyalty, and ambition in ancient Israel. Joab's first significant involvement with David likely began when David was still a fugitive from King Saul. According to the first book of Samuel, chapter 22, verse 1, when David fled to the cave of Adullam, members of his family and around 400 men gathered around him. Given that Joab was one of David's nephews, he may have joined David's early followers during this period. Although not explicitly mentioned at this time, Joab was likely among the trusted warriors who were fiercely loyal to David, beginning a relationship that would define much of his life. The first mention of Joab by name occurs after David is crowned king of Judah, the southern tribe, following the death of Saul. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 2, verse 13, we learn that Joab led David's forces in a conflict against the forces of Abner, the commander of Saul's army, who was supporting Ishbosheth, Saul's son, as king over the northern tribes. The battle took place near the pool of Gibeon and quickly escalated from a small contest between representatives of each side to a full-scale confrontation. During the pursuit that followed, Joab's brother Asahel was killed by Abner after relentlessly chasing him. This personal loss deeply affected Joab and set the stage for future enmity between him and Abner. When David finally became king over all Israel, he sought to establish a strong, unified kingdom. Jerusalem was selected as the capital, but it was controlled by the Jebusites, a Canaanite people who had successfully resisted conquest by the Israelites up to that point. In the first book of Chronicles, chapter 11, verse 6, David promised command of his army to the one who would lead the charge to capture the city. Joab took up the challenge and led the successful assault on Jerusalem, earning himself the position of commander-in-chief of David's army. As commander, Joab quickly established himself as an effective but ruthless leader. His military skills were evident in the many campaigns that followed, as he helped David extend Israel's borders and defeat surrounding enemies. Joab's successes in battle solidified his position as David's most trusted military leader, but his harsh methods and ambition often conflicted with David's more merciful nature. As David consolidated power over Israel, he sought reconciliation with Abner, who had been commander of Saul's forces. When Abner offered to help David unify Israel under his rule, David accepted his proposal and held a peaceful meeting with him. However, when Joab learned of Abner's meeting with David, he became suspicious and enraged. He called Abner back under the pretense of further discussions, but instead, Joab killed him in an act of personal vengeance for the death of his brother Asahel. David, horrified by the murder, publicly mourned Abner and distanced himself from Joab's actions. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 3, verse 39, David lamented that the sons of Zeruiah, a term referring to Joab and his brothers, were too strong for him, revealing his frustration and the limits of his control over Joab. But one of the most challenging times in David's reign came when his son Absalom rebelled against him, seeking to usurp the throne. Joab initially supported David, organizing and leading the king's forces against the rebels. During the battle that ensued, Absalom was caught by his hair in the branches of a tree as he tried to escape on his mule, although David had explicitly commanded his generals to deal gently. With Absalom, Joab saw Absalom as a serious threat to David's rule and decided to end it once and for all. Disregarding David's orders, Joab killed Absalom, an act recorded in the second book of Samuel, chapter 18, verses 14 and 15. This act of defiance marked one of the most significant breaches of David's trust, yet it also illustrated Joab's unwavering pragmatism and his belief that he was acting in David's best interest. After Absalom's death, David was devastated, grieving openly for his son. Joab, recognizing the impact this mourning was having on the morale of David's troops, rebuked David sharply, urging him to express gratitude to his soldiers rather than focusing solely on his personal loss. In the second book of Samuel, chapter 19, verses 5 through 8, Joab's words are harsh, but they convinced David to pull himself together and honor his troops. Joab's blunt approach exemplified his practical, unsentimental loyalty to David, yet it also highlighted the tension between the king's compassionate nature and Joab's brutal pragmatism. Later in David's reign, the king ordered a census of Israel, a decision that Joab opposed as he sensed it was motivated by pride and could bring divine judgment. Joab reluctantly carried out the census, but as he feared, it resulted in a punishment from God, leading to a deadly plague upon the people of Israel. This event, chronicled in the second book of Samuel, chapter 24, illustrates Joab's insight and his willingness to challenge David when he believed the king was acting against God's will. Joab, David's fiercely loyal but often ruthless commander, was known not only for his military successes but also for his readiness to eliminate any rival commanders who might threaten his position or David's rule. His killing of other commanders, including Abner, Amasa, and Absalom, highlights both his strategic pragmatism and his disregard for David's orders and preferences. Joab's actions reveal his commitment to securing David's reign, but they also reflect his ambition and determination to maintain his own power within the kingdom. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, was a respected and influential military leader who initially supported Ishbosheth, Saul's son, as king over Israel. After a prolonged civil conflict between Ishbosheth and David, Abner decided to switch allegiance to David and broker a peaceful unification of the kingdom under David's rule. This arrangement was highly favorable to David, and he welcomed Abner with open arms, accepting his offer to help bring the northern tribes of Israel under David's leadership. However, Joab held a personal grudge against Abner. In an earlier battle between the forces of Ishbosheth and David, Joab's brother Asahel had relentlessly pursued Abner, who ultimately killed him in self-defense. Joab never forgave Abner for Asahel's death and saw his arrival in David's court as an opportunity for revenge. Despite David's explicit trust in Abner, Joab acted independently, luring Abner back to Hebron under the pretense of further discussions. There, Joab killed Abner, stabbing him in the stomach as an act of personal vengeance rather than justice. David was horrified by Joab's actions and publicly distanced himself from the murder, mourning Abner's death and condemning Joab's actions. David's lament in 2 Samuel 3:39 captures his frustration, "And I am weak today, though anointed king and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me." Although Joab remained David's commander, this incident exposed the limits of David's control over him and demonstrated Joab's ruthless determination to avenge his family and eliminate rivals. Amasa was another commander who became a target of Joab's wrath. After Absalom's failed rebellion against David, David sought to reconcile with those who had fought against him. As part of this effort, David appointed Amasa, who had served as Absalom's commander, to replace Joab as commander of the army. This decision was likely motivated by a desire to unify the kingdom and bridge the divides created by the civil war, but it also sidelined Joab, threatening his position. When Sheba, a Benjaminite, rebelled against David shortly after Absalom's rebellion, David ordered Amasa to assemble the troops to quash the revolt. However, Amasa took longer than expected, giving Joab an opportunity to reclaim his position. Seizing this chance, Joab approached Amasa under the guise of friendship, greeting him with the traditional gesture of a kiss on the cheek. As he drew Amasa close, Joab suddenly struck, killing him with a single blow to the stomach, disemboweling him. This act, described in 2 Samuel 29:10, was both brutal and calculated, as Joab then proceeded to lead the troops himself to suppress Sheba's rebellion. This killing further demonstrated Joab's unwillingness to tolerate any threat to his command. Amasa's death served Joab's interests, enabling him to eliminate a rival and reclaim his role as commander-in-chief. David, though he knew of Joab's actions, was either unable or unwilling to take immediate action against Joab, underscoring the extent of Joab's power and influence. Joab's involvement in the downfall of Adonijah marked one of the final and most consequential events of his life, culminating in his own tragic end. This episode occurred in the later years of King David's life, during a period of intense political uncertainty over who would succeed him. David was aging and in poor health, and his apparent inability to declare a successor had opened the door to rivalries among his sons. Adonijah, David's fourth son, saw this as an opportunity to claim the throne, and Joab, once fiercely loyal to David, aligned himself with Adonijah, perhaps hoping to maintain his position of power and influence within the new regime. However, this decision would ultimately lead to Joab's undoing. As David's health declined, Adonijah saw his chance to seize power, particularly since he was one of David's oldest surviving sons, following the deaths of Amnon and Absalom. Adonijah's bid for the throne is detailed in the first book of Kings, chapter 1. Confident of his status, he began to position himself as the king's successor, gathering key supporters to legitimize his claim. Among his followers were Joab, the commander of Israel's army, and Abiathar the priest, both of whom held significant influence in David's kingdom. By aligning himself with these powerful men, Adonijah hoped to bolster his claim to the throne and secure widespread support. Joab's support for Adonijah is often interpreted as a pragmatic decision. Having been David's commander for many years, Joab was a seasoned and politically astute figure who likely saw Adonijah's bid for kingship as an opportunity to retain his position under a new ruler. Given Joab's own history of defiance and independence, he may have viewed Solomon, David's chosen successor, as less favorable to his continued power. Solomon was young and untested, but he was also known for his wisdom and might have posed a threat to Joab's authority as he established his rule. Thus, Joab's decision to support Adonijah may have stemmed from a desire to align himself with a leader he perceived as a safer bet for his own future. While Adonijah was building his coalition, Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, took decisive action to ensure Solomon's rightful ascension to the throne. They reminded David of his promise that Solomon would succeed him, and David, recognizing the urgency of the situation, ordered that Solomon be anointed king immediately. But this swift action, detailed in the first book of Kings, chapter 1, verses 32 to 39, effectively countered Adonijah's claim. Solomon's anointing not only demonstrated David's endorsement, but also won the support of the people, leaving Adonijah's faction isolated and vulnerable. When Adonijah and his followers heard that Solomon had been anointed king, they realized their position was untenable. Adonijah fled to the altar, seeking sanctuary, fearing retribution from Solomon. Solomon initially showed clemency, sparing Adonijah's life on the condition that he would prove himself loyal. However, Adonijah's subsequent attempt to secure Abishag, a former concubine of David, as his wife was perceived as a threat to Solomon's authority. In the ancient Near Eastern context, taking a former king's concubine was often a symbolic claim to the throne, and this act reignited suspicion regarding Adonijah's intentions. Solomon responded to Adonijah's actions by ordering his execution, marking the final downfall of Adonijah's attempt to claim the throne. With Adonijah dead, Solomon turned his attention to the other key figures who had supported his brother's rebellion, including Joab. Recognizing the gravity of his situation, Joab sought refuge at the altar, hoping to escape punishment by clinging to a place traditionally regarded as a sanctuary. This act is described in the first book of Kings, chapter 2, verses 28 to 34. However, Solomon did not see Joab's appeal to the altar as a reason to spare him. Joab's history of bloodshed and defiance, having killed Abner, Amasa, and Absalom against David's wishes, had finally caught up to him. Solomon, heeding David's earlier advice to punish Joab for these actions, ordered Benaiah, one of his trusted military commanders, to execute him. Benaiah approached Joab at the altar and offered him the chance to come away from it, but Joab refused, preferring to die there rather than face justice elsewhere. Following Solomon's orders, Benaiah killed Joab at the altar, ending the life of one of Israel's most complex and controversial military figures. Joab's death represented not only the end of his personal story, but also a symbolic close to an era characterized by political turbulence and internal strife within David's kingdom. Joab's relationship with David was multifaceted, marked by both loyalty and conflict. Though Joab served David faithfully for decades, he was often a disruptive force, acting on his own judgment and sometimes defying David's orders. David, who is described in the first book of Samuel, chapter 13, verse 14, as a man after God's own heart, was often torn between his reliance on Joab's military expertise and his frustration with Joab's ruthless tactics. The bond between them was not solely professional, they were family and had shared experiences that shaped the destiny of Israel. Despite his flaws, Joab was instrumental in building David's kingdom. His victories in battle and his unyielding loyalty to David's throne helped secure Israel's borders and expand its influence. Yet Joab's ruthlessness also created instability, and his willingness to kill rivals including Abner, Amasa, and Absalom reflected his prioritization of power and control. Joab remains a controversial figure in Israel's history. He was a skilled and courageous warrior who helped David establish a powerful kingdom, but he was also a man of ambition and violence, willing to shed blood for the sake of personal gain or perceived loyalty. Unlike David, whose heart sought to honor God, Joab's motivations often seemed grounded in practicality and self-preservation. His support of Adonijah over Solomon revealed his underlying ambition, and his execution marked the end of an era. The story of Joab serves as a reminder of the complexities of power, loyalty, and morality. Though Joab was a loyal servant to David, he ultimately chose his own path, defying both king and God when it suited his interests. His legacy is one of strength and loyalty intertwined with ambition and ruthlessness. Through Joab's life, we see the tension between loyalty and personal ambition and the often tragic consequences of choosing one's own way over divine guidance. Despite his imperfections, Joab's life had a lasting impact on Israel's history and serves as an example of both the qualities and dangers inherent in military and political power. King David feared Joab because Joab was not only powerful and effective as a military commander, but also unpredictable and ruthlessly independent. David understood that Joab's influence extended beyond the battlefield. He commanded significant loyalty from the army and was deeply entrenched in the political and military fabric of David's kingdom. Joab's autonomy and willingness to defy the king made David hesitant to strip him of his command or take direct action against him, as doing so could lead to internal strife or even a rebellion. Joab was a highly capable and experienced military leader who had led Israel to victory numerous times. His expertise and success in warfare had won him the loyalty of the troops, which meant that his influence was not easily transferable. Removing Joab from his position could have created discontent among the ranks, jeopardizing David's hold over the army and, by extension, the stability of his kingdom. David likely feared that, without Joab's leadership, he could lose control over the military, which was crucial for maintaining peace and security. Joab had a history of eliminating those he perceived as threats, regardless of David's wishes. For example, when Abner, the former commander under Saul, sought to align with David and strengthen his claim to the throne, Joab killed him, ostensibly in revenge for his brother Asahel's death, but also likely out of fear that Abner's presence might endanger his position. David publicly mourned Abner's death and condemned the act, but did not punish Joab, perhaps realizing that challenging him directly could have dangerous repercussions. Joab's willingness to kill even family members who posed a threat to his authority made David aware that Joab might not hesitate to turn against him if he felt threatened. Joab was pragmatic and violent, and his loyalty to David was not unconditional. It was, instead, based on his own interests. Joab was not just a soldier, he was politically astute. He had a deep understanding of the political landscape and often acted in ways he thought would protect David's rule, even if it meant defying David's direct orders. For example, when David's son Absalom rebelled, David commanded his men to deal gently with him. However, Joab ignored this command and killed Absalom, perceiving that as long as Absalom was alive, he would remain a threat to David's reign. This incident highlighted Joab's tendency to take matters into his own hands, often without consulting David. By executing Absalom, Joab sent a message that he was willing to make decisions of national importance independently, showing his disregard for David's authority in such matters. This independence made David wary of Joab's influence and power. David's kingdom was a delicate coalition, especially in its early years. Dismissing or punishing Joab, who held such sway over the military, could have destabilized David's rule. A public dismissal or punishment of Joab could have alienated key factions within David's army or encouraged Joab to retaliate. David's comment in 2 Samuel, "I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too harsh for me," reflects his understanding that Joab and his brothers held significant influence and were difficult to control. Joab also knew some of David's secrets and had even participated in morally questionable acts on David's behalf. When David orchestrated the death of Uriah to cover up his affair with Bathsheba, it was Joab who carried out the order without hesitation. This act bonded Joab and David in a shared guilt, which may have further complicated David's ability to confront him. Joab's knowledge of this dark episode would have made him a dangerous adversary, as he could potentially use this information against David. In essence, David feared Joab because Joab was a powerful and independent force who was both an asset and a potential liability. Joab's grip on the army, his ruthlessness, his political acumen, and his role in carrying out David's more questionable commands made him a complex figure who could not be easily dismissed or confronted. Stripping Joab of his command could have incited rebellion, weakened David's position, and left a dangerous enemy within his own kingdom. Instead, David managed this tension by keeping Joab close and balancing his authority carefully, even if it meant tolerating Joab's insubordination at times. If you've enjoyed this journey through the life of Joab, the fierce and complex commander in King David's army, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts on his loyalty, ambition, and the tension between him and David. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with others who might find it interesting, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories from the Bible. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Joab's life offers profound lessons in loyalty, ambition, courage, and the complex nature of human relationships. As the commander of King David's army, Joab displayed exceptional skill, bravery, and an unwavering sense of duty. He was fiercely loyal to David, risking his life countless times and leading Israel to victory in battles that helped establish David's kingdom. This loyalty teaches us about the value of standing by those we serve, even when faced with personal risk or sacrifice. Yet Joab's story is also a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the potential consequences of prioritizing one's position over integrity. Joab was willing to defy orders and even kill if it meant securing his command. He eliminated perceived threats, such as Abner and Amasa, to maintain his status as army commander. This teaches us the importance of humility and restraint, and how ambition, when left unchecked, can turn loyalty into self-preservation. Joab's willingness to act outside of David's wishes reveals how easy it is to justify questionable actions when motivated by personal interests, even if disguised as loyalty. Joab's interactions with David were complicated. He was both family and subordinate. Despite David's authority, Joab occasionally acted independently and, at times, disobeyed direct orders if he believed it was in David's best interest. When David mourned excessively for his rebellious son Absalom, it was Joab who urged him to face the troops and show strength, thereby putting the kingdom's stability above David's grief. Through this, we see the importance of speaking truth to those we care about, even when the truth is hard to hear. Joab's life reminds us that real loyalty sometimes involves confronting and correcting others out of genuine concern for their well-being.